The click of the new deadbolt is deafening in the sudden quiet of the villa's grand hallway. It's a sound of finality, a metallic punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I never wanted to read. My father's hand, steady and sure, withdraws the key. He doesn't look at me, his gaze fixed on the heavy oak door, as if daring it to betray us. Outside, the late afternoon sun casts long, skeletal shadows from the ancient pines that guard this place, our place, or what I thought was ours. The air is cold, carrying the scent of damp earth and an approaching storm, or maybe that's just the ice forming in my own veins. Any minute now, they'll arrive. His car, sleek and pretentious, will crunch up the gravel driveway. He'll be laughing, that easy, careless laugh he reserves for moments he thinks no one important is watching. And she'll be beside him, basking in the stolen glow of a weekend she believes is hers for the taking. My stomach lurches, a sickening combination of dread and a grim, unfamiliar satisfaction. The silence in the villa is a living thing, breathing with me, waiting. My father finally turns his eyes, the same deep blue as mine, finding my face. There's a sorrow there, a deep, weary pain that mirrors my own, but beneath it, a bedrock of resolve that calms the tremor in my hands. He built this house, log by painstaking log, with his own calloused hands, long before Mark ever darkened its doorway. And he's not about to let it be defiled. Not now. Not ever. This is a story about how a sanctuary can become a battleground, how the quiet hum of betrayal can be silenced by the roar of reclaimed dignity. Let me know where you're watching from, what time it is where you are. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me share these moments, these battles fought in the quiet corners of life, more than you can imagine. Our life, before the ground cracked open beneath my feet, had the comfortable rhythm of a well-loved song. Mark and I, we weren't a whirlwind romance from a movie. We were a slow build, a friendship that deepened into love, or so I'd believed. 15 years. A decade and a half of shared mornings, inside jokes, the quiet intimacy of knowing which side of the bed the other preferred, how they liked their coffee. We had a life stitched together with seemingly strong threads, a cozy home in the city, careers that kept us busy but not estranged, a circle of friends who'd seen us through thick and thin. Or so I thought. Mark was an architect, his mind always drawing lines, creating structures. He was ambitious, driven, and I'd admired that. I saw it as a strength, a passion. Now, I see the sharp edges I'd ignored, the way his designs always had to be the grandest, the most noticed. My own life was quieter. I'm a librarian, a curator of stories, a guardian of other people's words and worlds. Perhaps I was too comfortable in the narratives I read, assuming my own would follow a predictable, gentle plot. The villa, that was my father's heart, translated into wood and stone. Perched on a bluff overlooking a wild, windswept stretch of coast, it wasn't a showpiece. It was a haven. My childhood summers were spent there, tracking sand across the worn wooden floors, the scent of salt and pine needles a permanent fixture in my memory. My mother, before she passed, had planted the rambling roses that now threatened to consume the west wall, their scent a sweet, poignant reminder of her. Every beam, every stone, held a story, a memory of her laughter, of my father's quiet pride. When Mark came into my life, my father welcomed him. He taught Mark how to fish off the treacherous rocks below the villa, shared his best brandy on the wide porch during summer storms, treated him like the son he never had. The villa became our sanctuary too, Mark's and mine. Weekends away from the city's clamor, holidays spent with my father, the three of us falling into an easy rhythm. Mark professed to love it as much as I did. He'd sketch additions, improvements, always grander, always more him. My father would listen patiently, a small smile playing on his lips, and then quietly veto anything that threatened the villa's soul. I see now that Mark probably saw the villa as another acquisition, another symbol of the life he was building, a life I was merely a part of, not a partner in. Lately, though, the song of our life had developed a discordant note, a faint hum of static just beneath the surface. Mark was distant. Not unkind, not obviously so, but preoccupied. His phone, once casually left on the nightstand, was now always in his pocket, screen down. Late nights at the office became more frequent. Hushed calls taken in another room, explained away with a casual, "Just work, honey." Big project, I'd feel a flicker of unease, a small, cold knot in my stomach, but I'd push it down.
Trust.
That was the foundation, wasn't it? To question him felt like a betrayal in itself, a crack I'd be introducing into our carefully constructed life. I told myself it was stress, the pressure of his latest design competition. I made excuses for him, for us. I'd try to bridge the growing gap, suggest a weekend away, just the two of us. Soon, Sarah, soon. He'd say, a fleeting kiss on my forehead before turning back to his laptop, his screen angled just so. The signs were there, like faint footprints in the snow, easy to miss if you weren't looking, easier still to pretend they weren't leading somewhere dangerous. I chose not to look. I chose to believe in the warmth, in the history, in the man I thought I knew. I chose ignorance, and it wrapped around me like a comforting blanket, soon to be ripped away. The discovery wasn't dramatic, no tearful confession or a private investigator's grainy photos. It was mundane, almost insultingly so. Mark had been complaining about his laptop running slow. I'm the more tech-savvy one, despite his architectural software wizardry. He'd asked me to take a look, to clear out some old files, run a diagnostic. He was in the shower, the water drumming a rhythm that suddenly felt ominous. I sat at his desk, the scent of his cologne, the one I'd bought him for our anniversary, hanging faintly in the air. His email was open, minimized. A habit. He rarely logged out. An unread message caught my eye. Not the sender, that was innocuous, a generic booking site. It was the subject line. Your weekend getaway confirmation. The Osprey's Nest. My blood went cold. The Osprey's Nest. That was our private, almost cringy, nickname for the master bedroom at the villa, the one with the huge bay window overlooking the ocean. We'd come up with it years ago, laughing, after watching a pair of ospreys building their nest on the cliffs. It was our name. My hand trembled as I clicked. The confirmation unfolded on the screen, stark and clinical.
2 nights.
This coming weekend. Guest name, Mark Sampson. And then, below it, a section for additional guest information, usually left blank for us. This time it wasn't. Guest 2. Chloe Dubois, Chloe. The name was a blank slate, meaning nothing and everything. A cold wave washed over me, so intense I felt dizzy. I scanned the dates again, my mind struggling to process the blatant, casual cruelty of it. Our villa. Our Osprey's Nest. He was taking another woman to our sanctuary. The details blurred. Check-in time, check-out time, a note about preferring a late check-out if possible. My breath hitched. He was meticulous, even in his betrayals. I could hear the shower stop. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of shock. I minimized the email, my fingers fumbling on the trackpad, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I closed the laptop, a little too quickly, a little too loudly. When he walked back into the study, toweling his hair, smelling of soap and steam and lies, he smiled at me. All sorted, he asked, his voice easy, casual. I nodded, unable to speak, a bitter taste rising in my throat. He didn't notice the tremor in my hands or the way my smile felt like cracking glass. He just saw what he wanted to see. His compliant wife, fixing his problems, while he planned to shatter our world in the very place we'd built it. That night, the static I'd been ignoring became a roar, drowning out 15 years of shared history, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than any argument. The days that followed were a blur of forced smiles and a hollow ache that settled deep in my bones. I moved through our home like a ghost, haunting the periphery of Mark's oblivious contentment. Each morning, he'd kiss me goodbye, a peck on the cheek, his mind already on his day on her. The casual intimacy of it was a fresh stab each time. How could he touch me, speak to me with such normalcy, while this chasm was opening between us, a chasm he dug with such deliberate care. I replayed the image of that booking confirmation in my mind, over and over, until it was burned onto my eyelids. Chloe Dubois. I even Googled the name, a sick compulsion I couldn't resist. A woman from his office, younger, with a bright, predatory smile in her corporate headshot. An intern and associate? The details didn't matter. The betrayal did. The sheer, unadulterated gall of using the villa. It wasn't just about sex. It was about appropriation, about colonization of sacred ground. He was taking our memories, our shared history, and overlaying it with something cheap and illicit. Sleep became a battlefield. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, Mark breathing evenly beside me, a stranger whose warmth I could no longer trust. The darkness amplified every fear, every imagined scenario. What did they talk about? Did he share our private jokes with her? Did he tell her he loved her in the same spots he'd whispered it to me? The questions were a form of self-torture, but I couldn't stop them. During the day, I tried to act normal. I went to work, shelved books, answered queries from patrons, all while a silent scream built inside me. My colleagues noticed, of course. "You okay, Sarah? You look tired," one of them said, her brow furrowed with concern. I'd force a smile, murmur something about a bad cold, a looming deadline. The lies came easily, too easily. I was becoming adept at deception, mirroring the man I now despised. I considered confronting him. Many times. I'd rehearse the words in my head, the accusations, the demands for explanation. But what then?
He'd lie.
I knew he would. He'd gaslight me, twist the narrative, make me doubt my own sanity. I'd seen him do it in smaller ways over the years, deflecting blame, subtly rewriting history to suit his needs. This time, the stakes were too high. A messy, emotional confrontation would achieve nothing but his temporary discomfort and my deeper despair. He'd apologize, feign remorse, promise it would never happen again. And I'd be left with the wreckage, wondering if I could ever believe a word he said. No, a simple confrontation felt like bringing a knife to a gunfight I was destined to lose. The helplessness was a suffocating blanket. I felt small, insignificant, a pawn in his selfish game. He held all the cards, or so it seemed. The weekend loomed closer, a dark storm cloud on the horizon. Mark grew more cheerful, more attentive in small, almost unnoticeable ways. A flower bought from a street vendor, an offer to cook dinner, small gestures designed, I now realized, to assuage his own guilt or to keep me unsuspecting. Each act of feigned affection was like a sprinkle of salt on an open wound. He hummed as he packed his weekend bag, a small duffel I'd bought him for a birthday years ago. "Just a guy's fishing trip," he'd announced casually a week prior, before I'd found the email. "Thompson's got a new boat, wants to try it out up the coast." He'd even named a mutual friend, a solid, unsuspecting alibi. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. I just nodded, my insides churning. He was a good architect, I had to give him that. He built his deceptions on solid foundations of half-truths and plausible deniability. I started gathering my own evidence, quietly, methodically. I took a screenshot of the booking confirmation, saved it to a secure drive. I noted down the dates, the times. I became a detective in my own life, sifting through the debris of my marriage for clues, for weapons. The more I uncovered, the sicker I felt, but also, a strange coldness began to creep in, replacing the initial heat of my grief and anger. It was the chill of realization. He wasn't just careless, he was cruel. He wasn't just making a mistake, he was making a choice that deliberately trampled on everything I held dear. The villa. He knew what that place meant to me, to my family. To use it for a sordid affair wasn't just an insult to me. It was an insult to my father, to my mother's memory. And that, I realized with a sudden, sharp clarity, was something I couldn't just absorb. The image of him and this Chloe, laughing in the osprey's nest, their bodies tangled in the sheets I had chosen, on the bed where my parents had once slept, it was an abomination. The helplessness began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning ember of rage, a demand for something more than just tears and heartbreak. He thought he was in control. He thought he was smart. He had no idea what was coming. The shift happened on a Tuesday, 3 days before their planned tryst. I was staring out the window of my library office, watching the rain lash against the glass, mirroring the storm inside me. For days, I'd been adrift, tossed about by waves of grief and anger, feeling utterly powerless.
Confront him? He'd lie.
Leave him? Yes, that was inevitable now, but the thought of him simply walking away, perhaps even feeling relieved, to continue his life with her unburdened, while I was left to pick up the pieces of our shattered marriage and his desecration of my family's sanctuary, it was unbearable. It wasn't enough. Justice, I realized, wasn't just about ending the marriage. It was about him understanding, truly understanding, the magnitude of his betrayal, the depth of the wound he'd inflicted. And the villa was the key. It was more than just a house, it was a symbol. His use of it was the ultimate act of disrespect, the ultimate display of his entitlement. And if it was the weapon he chose to wound me most deeply, then perhaps it could also be the instrument of his reckoning. A thought, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, pierced through my despair. My father. The villa was his creation, his legacy. Legally, I remembered a conversation years ago, a dry discussion about estate planning, wills, trusts. The villa wasn't in my name, nor Mark's. It was held in a family trust, administered by my father. Mark had always conveniently overlooked that detail, acting as if his marriage to me granted him squatter's rights, or even a de facto ownership he could flaunt. He loved to play the generous host there, inviting his business associates, showing it off as if he'd laid every stone himself. The arrogance of it, now seen through the lens of his betrayal, was astounding. A new resolve hardened within me, pushing aside the trembling uncertainty. I wouldn't just be a victim in the story. I wouldn't just absorb the blow. He wanted to play games in my father's house? Then he'd have to play by my father's rules. That evening, I called my dad. My voice was surprisingly steady as I asked if I could come over, if he was free to talk. He sensed the unease immediately, that paternal radar that had never failed me. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice warm, concerned. "I'm on my way," I said, the words a commitment, a step onto a new, uncertain path. The decision felt like strapping on armor, piece by piece. The initial shock was a raw, open wound. The grief was a heavy cloak. But this new feeling? This was steel. Cold, hard, and ready for battle. Mark thought he was taking something from me. He had no idea I was about to help my father take something far more significant from him. The game was changing, and he wasn't even aware he was playing for stakes he couldn't afford to lose. The drive to my father's house was a blur. The city lights smeared past my rain-streaked windshield, each one a tiny, indifferent star in my personal galaxy of turmoil. When I arrived, he was waiting, his porch light a welcoming beacon in the damp darkness. He enveloped me in a hug, the kind that had always made me feel safe, and for a moment, I almost broke, the carefully constructed dam of my composure threatening to burst. But I held it together. We sat in his familiar living room, surrounded by a lifetime of memories, photos of my mother smiling down from the mantelpiece. The air smelled of old books and pipe tobacco, a scent of comfort and stability that was so at odds with the chaos raging inside me. Telling him was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The words felt like stones in my mouth, heavy and jagged. I laid out the facts, clinically at first, the distant behavior, the password-protected phone, the late nights. Then the email. The Osprey's nest. Chloe Dubois. As I spoke, I watched his face. His initial concern softened into a deep, quiet sorrow, then hardened into something I recognized, a slow-burning, righteous anger. An anger that mirrored my own, but was somehow cleaner, less complicated by the messy tendrils of lost love and shattered intimacy. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his gaze unwavering, his hands clasped loosely in his lap. When I finally finished, the silence in the room was profound, broken only by the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, measuring out the seconds of my unraveling life. He was quiet for a long time, staring into the cold fireplace as if seeing flames there. Then he looked at me, his eyes clear and direct. "The villa," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "He's taking this woman to your mother's house." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, weighted with a pain that went beyond my own. For him, the villa wasn't just a property. It was a shrine to my mother, a testament to their love. Mark's transgression wasn't just against me. It was a desecration. "What do you want to do, Sarah?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. And that was when I laid out the nascent idea, the one that had been forming in the back of my mind.
The trust.
His control. The possibility of not just barring Mark's entry, but of making a statement so profound, so undeniable, that it would shake him to his core. My father listened, nodding slowly. A grim smile touched his lips, a flicker of the old fighter I'd seen glimpses of when he'd championed causes he believed in. "He always was a presumptuous bastard about that place," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Thought his name on the damned mailbox meant he owned the view." The planning began that night, a quiet conspiracy between a wounded daughter and a protective father. Lawyers were consulted the next day, my father's old, silver-haired attorney, who looked like he'd stepped out of a classic film and possessed a mind like a steel trap. The legalities were, as my father had suspected, straightforward. The villa was entirely under his control via the trust. Mark had no legal claim, no right of access if my father chose to deny it. The upcoming weekend, Mark's planned romantic idyll, was about to become a very public, very personal lesson in consequences. The days leading up to it were a strange torment. I lived a double life. To Mark, I was still his wife, perhaps a little quiet, a little withdrawn, but fundamentally unchanged. He was busy, excited in his own way, making calls, confirming details I was now privy to in a way he could never imagine. He even asked me to iron his favorite linen shirt, the one he always wore on special occasions. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. I ironed it perfectly, each crease sharp, a silent act of preparing him for his own downfall. The emotional stress was immense. I felt like a tightly coiled spring, the tension building with each passing hour. Sleep was elusive. When I did drift off, my dreams were a chaotic mix of past happiness and future confrontation, the villa looming large in all of them, sometimes a sanctuary, sometimes a trap. The morning of Friday, D-Day, as I'd grimly started calling it in my head, Mark woke early, whistling softly as he showered. He was practically vibrating with anticipation, a poorly suppressed excitement that made my stomach churn. He packed his duffel bag, the one I'd bought him, with a carefully ironed shirt, a new bottle of cologne I didn't recognize, and a smug certainty that was almost palpable. He kissed me goodbye at the door, a quick, almost dismissive peck. "Have a great weekend, honey," he said, his eyes already looking past me, towards his illicit adventure. "Wish I could take you, but you know guys trip," I nodded, my face a mask of serene understanding. "Have fun," I managed, my voice surprisingly even. "Catch a big one." The lie felt like ashes in my mouth. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, the charade dropped. A wave of nausea hit me. This was it. No turning back. I called my father. "He's gone," I said, my voice tight. "Okay, sweetheart," he replied, calm and steady. "I'm heading up there now. The locksmith will meet me at noon. Everything's in place." I hung up, a profound sense of unreality washing over me. This meticulously planned life I had, this man I had loved, this future I had envisioned, it was all about to be irrevocably altered. A part of me screamed in protest, wanted to call Mark, to stop this, to rewind to a time when ignorance was still bliss. But another part, the part that had been forged in the fires of betrayal, stood firm. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my space, my father's legacy. It was about drawing a line in the sand so deep, so permanent, that Mark would never again mistake kindness for weakness, or shared history for an open invitation to desecrate it. I spent the morning in a daze, pacing my silent house. The hours crawled by. Noon came and went. I imagined the locksmith at the villa, his tools glinting in the coastal sun, the old locks, witnesses to so many family moments, being drilled out, replaced. A symbolic act of cleansing, of fortification. Around 2 p.m., my father called. "It's done," he said. "New locks on all the doors and windows. The old keys are useless," he paused. "I've also put up new, private property, no trespassing signs." Very official looking. Legal counsel approved. There was a grim satisfaction in his voice that I understood completely. He told me he'd be waiting inside. He didn't ask me to come, but I knew I had to. I needed to see it. I needed to be there, not to gloat, but to bear witness. To close this chapter myself. I got in my car and started the drive up the coast, towards the villa, towards the storm I knew was about to break. The sky was darkening, mirroring my mood, the wind picking up, whipping the trees along the highway into a frenzy. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable collision. The drive to the villa was the longest of my life. Every mile felt loaded, each passing landmark a reminder of happier times, now tainted. The familiar scent of salt and pine as I got closer usually brought comfort. Today, it was laced with an undercurrent of metallic tension. I parked my car down the lane, out of sight from the main driveway, and walked the rest of the way, the wind tugging at my hair, the sky a bruised purple. My father's old Land Rover was parked discreetly behind a copse of trees. As I approached the villa, it looked different, more formidable. The new "no trespassing" signs were stark against the weathered wood, official and unwelcoming. It felt less like a home and more like a fortress. My father met me at the back door, his face etched with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. He didn't say much, just gave my arm a reassuring squeeze. We went inside. The silence was heavy, expectant. The new deadbolt on the front door gleamed. He'd left a couple of lights on, casting a warm glow that felt deceptive, like a trap beautifully laid. We sat in the living room, the room where I'd told him everything, and waited. It was just after 4 p.m. According to the booking, they were due around 4:30. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked, each second stretching into an eternity. My heart hammered against my ribs. What would he do? How would he react? How would she react? The image of her face, from that corporate headshot, flashed in my mind, bright, confident. That confidence was about to be severely tested. Then we heard it. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. My breath caught in my throat. My father put a steadying hand on my shoulder. Through the window, partially obscured by the lace curtains my mother had hung, I saw Mark's car pull up. It was a sleek, dark BMW, ostentatiously out of place in the rustic setting. He got out, stretched, a smug, satisfied look on his face. Then he opened the passenger door, and she emerged.
Chloe.
Younger than me, dressed in something fashionable and entirely unsuitable for the rugged coast. She looked around, a proprietary air about her, as if she were already imagining herself as lady of the manor. Mark, beaming, slung their bags over his shoulder and gestured grandly towards the front door, pulling out his key ring with a flourish. This was it. My father and I remained silent, hidden from view, watching. Mark inserted his key into the lock. It didn't turn. He jiggled it. Nothing. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He tried again with more force. The key stubbornly refused to budge. Chloe was watching him now, her smile faltering. "What's wrong?" I could faintly hear her ask, her voice light, a little impatient. "I don't know," Mark muttered, his jovial mood evaporating. "Keys sticking. Damn sea air, probably," he tried again, rattling the doorknob. The new deadbolt held firm. Frustration was rapidly turning into anger. He kicked the bottom of the door lightly. "Come on, you stupid thing." I saw him glance at the windows, perhaps considering another way in, but my father had been thorough. Every access point was secured. He fumbled for his phone, probably to call a caretaker, a number that would no longer work, or perhaps to look up a local locksmith, blissfully unaware the best one in the county had already paid a visit. His face was flushed. Chloe stood a little apart now, her arms crossed, her initial excitement clearly curdling into irritation. The hunter, confident in his domain, was finding himself locked out. The scene was almost comical, if it weren't so deeply painful. This man, who had so casually betrayed 15 years of marriage, was being defeated by a piece of metal, a symbol of a boundary he could no longer cross. The air in the living room was thick enough to cut. My father's hand was still on my shoulder, a silent anchor. Mark was pacing now in front of the door, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice growing louder, edged with panic and fury. He was leaving a voicemail, I guessed, for someone he thought could fix this. Chloe was tapping her foot, looking increasingly unimpressed. The grand romantic gesture was collapsing into a farce. This was the moment.
My father nodded at me.
We rose and walked towards the front door. He unlocked the deadbolt from the inside, the click echoing loudly, then pulled the heavy oak door open. Mark was mid-rant into his phone, his back to us. He spun around, startled, his face a mask of confusion that quickly morphed into disbelief as he saw us. His jaw dropped. "Sarah? Dad? What are you doing here?" His voice was a choked whisper. Chloe, standing behind him, looked equally stunned, her eyes wide, darting between Mark, me, and my father. The carefully constructed facade of his guy's fishing trip had just been blown apart. He looked from me to my father, then back to me, comprehension dawning with horrifying slowness in his eyes. The color drained from his face. He knew that we knew. The bags he'd been carrying slid from his shoulder, thudding onto the porch with a dull, final sound. Mark stared, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. "Sarah? Arthur? What is this?" The key, it didn't work. He was scrambling, his mind clearly racing to concoct a plausible explanation, a new lie to layer over the old ones. But his eyes, darting nervously towards Chloe, told the real story. Chloe, for her part, looked utterly bewildered, then a flicker of understanding, or perhaps just acute discomfort, crossed her face. She took a small step back, as if distancing herself from the impending explosion. My father stepped forward, his presence filling the doorway, an immovable object. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone was cold, flat, utterly devoid of the warmth he'd once shown Mark. "Your key doesn't work, Mark," he stated, "because the locks have been changed." Mark's eyes widened. "Changed?
Why?
Who?" He trailed off, looking at me, a desperate, pleading look that now only filled me with contempt. "We changed them," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, though my insides were a raging sea. "This is my father's house, Mark. You are never welcome to bring company here." The word company hung in the air, laden with unspoken accusation. Chloe flinched, her cheeks coloring. She looked at Mark, an expression of dawning horror on her face. She was realizing, perhaps for the first time, that she wasn't a partner in a glamorous affair, but a pawn in a very messy, very personal war. Mark spluttered. "But this is our villa. We always come here. I booked it for the weekend." He sounded like a petulant child, denied his favorite toy. The sheer audacity of his entitlement, even now, was breathtaking. My father's expression hardened. "Let me be very clear, Mark," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "This is my villa. It has always been my villa, held in a family trust for the benefit of my family. You, through your marriage to my daughter, were afforded the privilege of access. A privilege you have so spectacularly abused." He paused, letting the words sink in. "That privilege has now been permanently revoked." Mark looked like he'd been physically struck. "Permanently?
What are you talking about?"
"You can't do that." "Oh, I can," my father said, a grim certainty in his voice. "And I have. My lawyer has already drawn up the necessary notices. You are no longer welcome on this property. Ever. In fact," he continued, his eyes like chips of ice, "if you're not off these grounds in the next 5 minutes, I'll have you removed for trespassing." Mark paled. The bluster, the arrogance, it all just deflated. He looked smaller, suddenly, stripped of his borrowed status, his assumed power. He looked at Chloe, perhaps expecting her to defend him, to argue. But she was staring at him with an expression of mingled disgust and disillusionment. The suave, successful man who had wooed her, who had promised her a weekend in this beautiful, exclusive villa, was now revealed as a trespasser, a liar, a fool. "Mark," she said, her voice tight. "What is going on? Whose house is this?" Mark couldn't meet her eyes. He looked at the ground, at his feet, anywhere but at the faces of the people whose lives he had tried to wreck. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The wind howled around the corners of the villa, a mournful chorus to his humiliation. Then my father delivered the final, crushing blow. "And Mark," he said, his voice laced with a coldness that sent a shiver down even my spine, "given your recent choices, I've also instructed my lawyer to begin the process of ensuring that this property, and indeed any assets derived from my family, are fully protected from any future claims you might entertain as part of your divorce from my daughter." That was it. The gun he thought he was pointing at my life, my happiness, had just spun around and fired directly into his own carefully constructed world. It wasn't just about a ruined weekend. It was about tangible loss. The villa, a significant status symbol, a place he'd used to impress, to feel important, was now utterly beyond his reach. More than that, my father's words hinted at a financial firewall being erected, one that would ensure Mark's betrayal cost him far more than just his dignity. He finally looked up, his face a mess of shock, dawning realization, and a pathetic sort of despair. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There were no words, no lies left that could possibly mend this. Chloe, to her credit, didn't stick around for the fallout. She gave Mark one last, withering look, picked up her stylish little weekend bag, and turned on her heel. "I'm calling a cab," she announced to the empty air, and stalked off down the gravel driveway, her fashionable heels crunching with angry emphasis, not even giving Mark a backward glance. He didn't try to stop her. He just stood there, watching her go, the architect of his own ruin, left alone amidst the wreckage. He looked utterly defeated, a hollow shell of the confident man who had arrived just minutes before. The wind whipped his hair around his face, and he seemed to shrink, to collapse in on himself. There was no fight left in him, only the stark, bitter taste of consequences fully realized. He finally turned back to us, his eyes pleading lost. "Sarah," he began, his voice hoarse. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable, I hoped. There was pain there. Yes, a deep, aching sadness for the years wasted, for the love I thought we'd had. But there was also a cold, hard resolve. This was not the end I had ever wanted, but it was an end he had authored. My father simply pointed towards the driveway. 5 minutes, Mark. Mark stood there for another long moment, the fight completely gone, replaced by a dawning, crushing weight of reality. He looked at the villa, then at me, then at my father. His shoulders slumped. Without another word, he picked up his remaining bag, the one with the perfectly ironed shirt, and trudged after Chloe, a man utterly broken, his romantic getaway transformed into a walk of shame. We watched him go, his figure diminishing down the long driveway until he was just a speck in the distance, swallowed by the brooding landscape. The wind howled, a mournful, cleansing sound. When he was finally out of sight, my father closed the heavy oak door, the new deadbolt clicking decisively into place. The sound, this time, was one of relief, of a sanctuary reclaimed. He turned to me, his face softened by a weary sadness. He pulled me into a hug, and this time I let the tears come. Not tears of grief for Mark, not anymore. But tears of release, of a heavy burden finally set down. Tears for the past, for the innocence lost, but also, perhaps, tears for a future that was now a blank page, waiting to be written. We stood there for a long time, in the quiet embrace of the villa, the storm raging outside, a reflection of the tempest that had just passed through our lives. The villa felt different now. It was still a place of memory, of love, but it was also a place of strength, of resilience. It had weathered the storm, just as we had. My father made tea, a strong, sweet brew, just the way my mother used to like it. We sat by the window, watching the waves crash against the rocks below, the sky slowly, gradually, beginning to clear in the west as the storm front moved on. The air in the villa, once thick with tension and unspoken betrayals, now felt lighter, cleaner. The aftermath was messy, of course. Divorces always are. But the events at the villa had shifted the power dynamic irrevocably. Mark was a shadow of his former self, his arrogance shattered, his confidence gone. He tried, a few times, to appeal to me, to apologize, to bargain. But the words were hollow, meaningless. He wasn't sorry for the betrayal. He was sorry he'd been caught, sorry he'd lost so much. The legal protection my father had initiated for the family assets, including any share Mark might have imagined he had in the villa or its value, proved to be ironclad. His attempt to use our shared history as leverage, to claim a piece of my family's legacy, failed spectacularly. He was left with his career, somewhat tarnished by the whispers that inevitably followed such a dramatic implosion, and the bitter knowledge that his greed and deceit had cost him everything that truly mattered. As for me, the healing was a slow process. There were days of anger, days of profound sadness. But with each passing day, a sense of peace began to settle in. I found strength I didn't know I possessed. The librarian, the quiet curator of other people's stories, had finally taken control of her own narrative. The villa became my refuge again, truly mine and my father's. We spent weekends there, not speaking much of Mark, but simply existing in the renewed tranquility of the place. We planted new roses, stronger varietals, their thorns a reminder that beauty often needs to protect itself. The osprey's nest, once a symbol of his ultimate betrayal, was reclaimed. I repainted it, filled it with books and light, transforming it into a study, a place of quiet contemplation, its windows looking out not on a scene of deceit, but on the endless, powerful, cleansing ocean. Life moves on. The scars remain, but they are a testament to survival, to the battles fought and won, not in grand arenas, but in the quiet, fiercely defended spaces of the heart and home. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight to reclaim a part of yourself or your life that someone tried to take, I'd love to hear your version in the comments. And subscribing helps me bring more of these stories, these journeys through the complexities of human experience, to life. Thanks for being here with me today.